Marowak is a beloved and iconic Pokemon, a standout from Generation 1, as one of the only creatures in the game capable of wielding an object to enhance its power. Marowak's signature skull helmet and bone weapon are very cool and capture the imagination. Despite being equipped with impressive weaponry and equipment, Marowak is probably not a creature you would expect to excel in competitive play though. This absolute bonehead of a Pokemon doesn't look very imposing at all, and its stats aren't anything particularly special either. But sometimes looks can be deceiving, because Marowak's competitive career is quite a bit better than you might expect at first glance. Marowak has multiple generations of OU viability to its name, and even a decent competitive niche in official doubles rule sets. Marowak also has one of the coolest and most popular Alolan regional forms. Alolan Marowak is wonderful all around, with an awesome visual design, new Ghost Fire typing, and competitively, this was also a sleeper hit, with solid success in both singles and doubles. Let's take a look at the surprisingly good competitive history of Marowak. Subscribe to the channel very quickly for more updates on the whereabouts of Trapinch. Reports state that he did manage to recover his 1 million USD after winning a one-on-one duel against the notorious thief, but his current location is not known. Some believe he is in grave danger. Thank you. Even though Marowak debuted in the first Pokemon game, it wasn't until Generation 2 that Marowak became a superstar. First of all, look at that wonderful animated pixel art. He's spinning the bone around. Vincent van Gogh was turning in his grave once this hit the scene. This was incredible work. The concept of held items were introduced in Generation 2, and while most other Pokemon were just utilizing leftovers for some chip healing, Marowak got its own exclusive item, the Thick Club. Only Marowak and Cubone are allowed to wield the Thick Club, and if you wield it, your attack is doubled. This exclusive item is the source of Marowak's power. Double attack, we know many examples where doubling a stat is very, very powerful. The abilities of Azumarill and Medicham also grant double attack, and that's the whole reason you ever use those Pokemon. It doesn't even matter what your base stat is if you're able to double it, because with bonus stats from EVs and whatnot, your attack stat can achieve absurd levels once doubled. In Generation 2, Marowak is one of the few things in this format that can actually output some offensive pressure. It's a very slow-paced metagame. There's not that many boost sweepers or wall breakers, but Marowak is the one guy that can actually do that. It almost feels like a modern Pokemon in this format, because it has Swords Dance and Stab Earthquake and a really, really high attack stat and great coverage as well. Marowak is a fantastic Pokemon in Generation 2 competitive, and nothing in the game can match the sheer damage output of Marowak. Mono ground typing is also pretty nice. You have an immunity to electric in a world where Zapdos and Raikou reign supreme. Although they can hit you with super effective hidden power, they're not quite gonna one-hit KO you or anything, so Marowak is easily able to strike back against these two titans of the format. Marowak destroys Snorlax after a Swords Dance boost. It can make quick work of any bulky steel or rock type, such as an enemy Tyranitar, Rhydon, etc. And in fact, one of my favorite things about the Gen 2 OU metagame is that Marowak is a part of it. It's a delightful Pokemon to use. It's very satisfying, very fun, and I love how well it matches up into such common Pokemon. It's a much needed offensive breaker in a tier that can sometimes be frustratingly slow-paced. This is an absolute necessity in such a tier. In Generation 3, I can say from experience that Marowak is one of the scariest Pokemon that you can face. The potential for Marowak to clean up entire teams is unmatched. Marowak may be ranked UUBL, not officially OU, but don't let that deceive you, because Marowak can do great things in this generation. With the Thick Club item, this is still one of the most imposing forces in the game. There are some new Pokemon that can achieve similar levels of breaking power though, and are perhaps a bit easier to fit on teams. Heracross and Medicham are the big ones. Medicham has a similar effect to the Thick Club with the ability Pure Power, granting double attack. Compared to those Pokemon, Marowak is a little bit slow with only 45 base speed. With speed investment, it can hit up to 207, still outrunning a lot of good defensive Pokemon like Skarmory, Melodic, etc. But, Medicham and Heracross can outrun much more than Marowak can. But Marowak stands out as the best Pokemon in the game at a specific purpose. Marowak is the best Pokemon in the game at receiving speed. If you're using any kind of speed pass strategy, whether that's Ninjask speed pass or Agility Zapdos speed pass, you're almost always going to see a Marowak on those teams. That's because Marowak, with just +2 speed, is able to outrun the entire metagame, and in just a single Swords Dance, probably one-shot the entire metagame too. So with a speed pass strategy, Marowak is an incredible game ender, an incredible sweeper. Marowak has the benefit of sand immunity in a world where permanent sandstorm is everywhere. Stab Earthquake hits so hard, and you even have the new ability Rock Head, which grants an immunity to recoil damage from moves. So Double Edge is an option for absolutely through-the-roof neutral damage with 120 base power and no drawback because you're immune to recoil. Marowak can also be used as a powerful breaker on paraspam teams that aim to spread as much paralysis as possible and therefore enhance slow but threatening Pokemon just like Marowak. There's a famous team by the player Starmaster that uses this exact strategy with Marowak on a bulky balanced team alongside various paralysis spreading Pokemon. Against a paralyzed enemy, Marowak will of course threaten them with lethal force much of the time, and Marowak also gets the move Focus Punch, which is a fantastic way to punish a predicted switch out. Marowak does have a bit of competition in the paraspam threat department. Rhydon is a big one. Rhydon doesn't often fit on Gen 3 teams, but it's great on paraspam strategies because of its ground and rock stab and the substitute Megahorn set, which is very, very threatening, and that Pokemon has an impressive 130 base attack. But Marowak is much more threatening than Rhydon is directly, with higher damage output. Access to Focus Punch is a unique advantage of Marowak, and Marowak is also not threatened by grass coverage like Rhydon is. Rhydon is ×4 weak to grass, while Marowak is only ×2 weak, and Marowak will often live the common hidden power grass or hidden power ice from full health and be able to strike back. Generation 3 also introduced doubles battles for the first time, where 2 Pokemon can be on either side of the field, and Marowak proved itself to be a great Pokemon in that environment too. Marowak also gets access to the ability Lightning Rod, which you may look at and think, well, wait a minute, that sounds useless, because isn't that an electric immunity? And Marowak's already immune to electric by being a ground type? Well, when it was first introduced, Lightning Rod was a bit different. Lightning Rod actually does not grant electric immunity yet. This would be a change made in later games. Initially, Lightning Rod only had the effect of drawing electric moves towards it in doubles battles. So if you have a Marowak on the field next to an ally that is weak to electric moves, Marowak will draw those electric moves towards itself, and Marowak is of course immune to them. So Marowak is pretty great in doubles alongside electric weak Pokemon like Gyarados or Suicune or Aerodactyl. The doubles OU format is a format run by Smogon that uses Gen 3's cartridge mechanics, but there's also an official competitive doubles format that was played in the Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness GameCube game, and that is called Ore Coliseum, and this was actually the inception of what would later become the standard of competitive Pokemon. This format has all the same rules that modern VGC does, with a Bring 6 Pick 4 system, where in the game itself you only have 4 Pokemon that you choose, but you have a team preview where you can select which 4 Pokemon you want to bring to each game. This format also has an item clause, just like modern competitive Pokemon, and Marowak is convenient in a format with an item clause because its item is exclusive to it. It's the thick club, so it's not hogging an item from anything else. It is providing valuable utility, and it's a pretty powerful offensive threat. Rock Slide can hit both opponents, as can Earthquake, so Marowak and Gyarados are a classic combo that work well together in Gen 3 doubles, whether that's on cartridge or on the GameCube. Admittedly, from this point onwards, Marowak's competitive singles viability would really plummet, but in Generation 5, when competitive doubles really started to take off with the VGC scene, Marowak proved that its doubles viability and utility was still very much alive and well. This is not a central Pokemon in the doubles metagame by any means, but it has its value as a solid Lightning Rod Pokemon with some unique qualities compared to other options in that field. The thick club not hogging the item slot of other Pokemon is still a great advantage, and Marowak also has a new mechanic that enhances its potential, and that is Trick Room. Trick Room was introduced in Gen 4, and it is a field condition that inverts the speed stat. So instead of the faster Pokemon moving first, the slower Pokemon will move first, and that lasts for 5 turns. In competitive singles, this move isn't great. It's sometimes seen, but it's usually a fairly niche option. But in doubles, this mechanic is central, and it's one of the best strategies to build around in the whole game. Doubles battles go for less turns, so The fact that Trick Room only lasts for 5 turns is less of a drawback in a fast-paced environment like this, and also because you have an ally next to you that can immediately take advantage of the Trick Room that you're setting, it is more immediately impactful in that sense too. Marowak has always suffered from its relatively low speed compared to other breakers, but with the utility of Trick Room on its side, Marowak all of a sudden becomes incredibly frightening. And with a bit of redirection from Lightning Rod, attracting electric moves to itself, Marowak has the double-edged sword, or perhaps the double-edged bone, of this redirection utility and being a Trick Room wall breaker. Marowak also conveniently has 2 good options for ground stab with different purposes. Earthquake is of course a hard-hitting move that hits all Pokemon on the field. But sometimes you don't want to hit your ally with Earthquake, because Earthquake of course will also hit your ally. If you have a ground immune Pokemon next to you, that's fine, but that's not always going to be the case. Maybe you don't want to play into Wide Guard either by using Earthquake, so Bone Meringue is an alternative. Marowak has always had this move. Usually Earthquake is the better option, but Bone Meringue is a single target attack that has 50 power and hits twice. So Bone Meringue not only sets itself apart from Earthquake by being a single target attack rather than hitting the whole field, that of course has its value, but because of the 2-hit effect you can break past enemies with a Focus Sash. Focus Sash is a popular item in doubles to grant you a free extra turn. It's great on Pokemon trying to set up field conditions or just get a strong attack through with a guaranteed safety net. But Bone Meringue, since it hits twice, will bypass Focus Sash completely, and that is very valuable. In Generation 7, they decided to breathe some new life into Marowak, this old iconic ground type, with an all-new form, the Alolan regional form. And this Pokemon feels rather different. Although it has many of the same fundamental traits, like the Thick Club item, the same abilities, and much of the same move pool, this Marowak is very different visually, with a flaming club this time that's much scarier. Love the visual of this Pokemon. And it has a Fire Ghost typing instead now. That is quite different. And with this all new identity, Alolan Marowak completely reinvented itself with new ways to take advantage of the previous tools held by base Marowak. Rock Head is feeling much more useful now that you have access to Stab Flare Blitz. Before it was just Double Edge as a way to take advantage of Rock Head, but Flare Blitz is an incredible move, boosted by your Fire Stab, and you are also completely immune to the recoil from that. Alolan Marowak also has a pretty solid physical Ghost Stab move in the form of Shadow Bone. Most Ghost physical stab is pretty bad, with options like Shadow Claw and Shadow Punch with very low power. This has an impressive 85 power and a 20% chance to lower defense by 1 on top, which is a decent secondary effect that comes up sometimes. Although its stats are the same as Cantonian Marowak, this new typing has completely changed how Alolan Marowak was used, and this is a fairly viable Pokemon in OU. It's not ranked OU officially, it's ranked RU, but in the OU format, this is a unique breaker, and I recall seeing it quite a bit. Fire Ghost Stab is very threatening. And you have an incredibly hard-hitting fire move with almost no drawback. That's pretty hard to come by. Although Trick Room teams aren't very good in singles, Marowak Alola here certainly gives you a good reason to use Trick Room teams if you want to, because if you manage to set Trick Room and get this on the field, it is one of the most threatening things you can possibly see. Lightning Rod is also even more useful now, even though the redirection effect was useful in doubles for base Marowak. Alolan Marowak is not a ground type, so it isn't usually immune to electric. So now Alolan Marowak has this ability option that does grant electric immunity. Even in Gen 8 OU, you would sometimes see this Alolan Marowak set as a wall breaker. This Pokemon does have the drawback of being slow and fairly frail for the modern climate, as well as vulnerable to Stealth Rock, but that damage output is hard to pass up sometimes. It's such a hard-hitting Pokemon that in certain instances it can make up for all of its shortcomings. So this is a fairly viable Pokemon, all things considered, in singles, and in doubles, this feels like an even better version of the already decent Cantonian Marowak, as it has all the same advantages, but better offensive typing and better tools to pose a threat. It is still a great Pokemon under Trick Room. It can still provide that support of redirection to allies weak to electric. And in more than one of the VGC rule sets of Gen 7, Alolan Marowak felt like a really solid choice. A Pokemon very well suited to the doubles environment. In Generation 9, unfortunately, these Marowaks, both Marowaks, do not exist. They didn't put them in the game, but honestly I could see Alolan Marowak having a niche in Gen 9 OU. The type profile is just really good, You've got Hatterene, who can support you with its magic bounce to get rid of those pesky rocks. And Trick Room strategies are still not the best in singles, but with new abusers like Ursaluna and Enamorous Therian, maybe some sort of Trick Room offense team with Alolan Marowak could do work, and Terastallization is another great new tool for a Pokemon like this. All things considered, I think that this bone-headed Pokemon has had a rather impressive competitive career, with great viability in the early generations, a surprising niche in doubles, and even one of the more successful regional variants. I don't think that this Pokemon was necessarily designed to be a competitive success, but it probably surpassed expectations in that department with a respectable resume. What do you think of Marowak over the years? And what is your favorite generation to use it in? Mine would be Generation 2, where it is at the peak of its power and metagame impact. Let me know your opinion down below in the comments, and thank you very much for watching.